put up a slide. Hi everyone, welcome to the INACOL Leadership Webinar entitled Planning, Implementation, and Policy Considerations for Blended Learning Programs. We have two outstanding presenters today, Greg Klein from the Rogers Family Foundation in California and Samantha Sherwood, who works at the Bronx Arena High School in New York City schools. Before we get started with them, let me just do a few housekeeping things here. Glad to see that there are people attending here from all over the world. Obviously, blended learning is an important topic for all of us to better understand as we impact learning across the world. As we go along with this webinar, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat room. I will keep track of what's going on in the chat room. Know that if you do send messages between yourselves to other people, that us moderators can see what you're typing, so make sure that you are pleasant in those comments. And then if for some reason anybody is calling in on the phone conference line, make sure that you are on mute. That helps it so that the rest of us can hear so well. So with that, again, I'm glad to have you here. I want to share a little bit of background. So when we talk about blended learning, we pretty much agree with the Horn and Staker definition that blended learning is a formal education program in which a student learns, at least in part, through online delivery of content and instruction with some element of student control over time, place, path, and or pace, and somewhat supervised in a brick-and-mortar location in a place like a school. When we talk about blended learning, we are not talking tech-rich. So tech-rich does not equal blended. So when we talk about blended learning, we're not simply talking about a teacher in front of a classroom with a digital whiteboard or students on computers, although that is a good educational model, but that's not what we talk about when we're talking about a full blended learning model. When we talk about blended learning or any kind of teaching and learning, we know that it involves what the student is doing and where the student is, what the teacher is doing and where the teacher is, and then finally what and where the content is. So know that when we talk about blended learning, we're talking about all of those different areas. Our focus today on this particular webinar is focused on the policy implementation and teacher support for blended learning programs from both the district perspective and school perspective. And like I mentioned earlier, we're excited to have two experts, practitioners who have been involved in blended learning for a while now, and we're happy to have them here with us today. So Greg, I'd like to ask you to get started, and then from you, you can introduce Samantha when you're finished.
Great. Hi, everybody. I hope I'm coming through. Had a few sound bugs earlier. I'm Greg. I'm the Director of Blended Learning here at the Rogers Family Foundation in Oakland, California. I spent 7 years as an Oakland middle school teacher, coach, and administrator, all in East Oakland. I had the great pleasure to join Downtown College Prep Alum Rock for 1 year about 2 years ago, where I got to be back in the classroom with middle schoolers, which are probably my favorites. And I had 3 groups of middle schoolers, 90 minutes each, in a one-to-one environment for that year, and we just had a lot of great fun playing with web-based tools, some of which you can see there, and really just trying out lots of stuff. That was kind of part of the school was just getting started, and we were asked to try lots of tools and survey kids and survey teachers and find out what we thought was working and what was working for different kids. I joined the Rogers Family Foundation. This is my second school year here in Oakland, back in Oakland, with our Blended Learning Initiative. We are funding in both the local Oakland Unified School District and some local charters. And really just briefly, this is one of a handful of initiatives that the foundation is involved in. And this blended initiative got started when we were hearing from our grantees, particularly our school principals, a few years ago that they needed more help than just subscription to Read 180 or building a lab in their classroom, that things would fall apart when the money was used up or the teacher moved on or the devices broke down. And so the foundation really did try to do our homework around what would it mean to kind of pull back some of the small grants that we had been making and instead kind of focus in on fewer schools but go deeper around the support. And that's kind of how the initiative got started. So with that, I'm going to mute myself again and pass it to Sam.
Thanks, Greg. Hopefully you guys can hear me as well. I'm definitely new to this particular platform. So my name's Sam Sherwood. I'm the assistant principal right now at Bronx Arena High School in New York. And similar to Greg, I actually got started working with middle schoolers as well. So we developed a science unit for my 6th grade class during my 3rd year of teaching, and kind of got hooked on the high-level skills that the kids were developing. And then I joined up with Ty Sassine, who's my co-leader at Bronx Arena, to actually start Bronx Arena 3 years ago. And then in addition to that, I've researched the characteristics of a successful teacher and a successful classroom in a fully blended class as part of my master's thesis. So I spent a year looking at a teacher who was in a fully blended middle school classroom, and tried to iron out some of the things that we were pulling together as to what was making that classroom successful. And then we continue to innovate, I feel like, every day at Bronx Arena. Just to give you some background on our school, we're a 3rd year fully blended transfer school in the Bronx, so that just means that we serve overage and undercredited students. We have a very unique, what we call arena model, that has students matched to a single generalist teacher in a 25-to-1 ratio for a 4-hour block. So this is to say that the students are working with one teacher across all of their core subject areas, and they're receiving that curriculum digitally, and then the teacher is helping to facilitate them through those courses while working on focusing them through cross-discipline skills. So it allows for one teacher to sort of see them through all these content areas while helping to develop Common Core aligned cross-discipline skills. In terms of iLearn NYC, which Bronx Arena is also a part of, that's a larger citywide initiative that is pushing the implementation of blended learning in classrooms across New York City. They provide resources both in hardware and software and in professional development to schools across the city of all sort of grade levels to help implement successful blended learning. And I'll pass it back off to Greg so he can talk about his work in Oakland, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we could talk about. So I hope this comes across as organized. And I'm not sure if people can click that link, that Oakland case study link, but I'm guessing that later on when it's all archived that we can make the link available or through the chat. But I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned so far. What does it look like right now in the middle of October here in Oakland in some of our schools, and then kind of where we're going moving forward, and then I'll pass it back to Sam. So this Oakland case study we originally wrote about a year ago, right as we were just starting to get things under control here in our first 4 schools, all district schools in Oakland. And it kind of catalogs at that point in time the hurdles and challenges that we still had not overcome and some of the ones where we felt more successful at. We also wrote an update to it last January where we got to kind of share some more of successes, but still plenty of learning left to do. And then what we haven't written up yet, I apologize, I just haven't had a chance, is potentially a 3rd update, which I think this webinar is going to give you a preview of what might be in that, which is really a chance to share a little bit about what our 2nd cohort of schools, what that process has looked like, and what it looks like right now. So, you know, Nicole and Rob asked me to think about some policies that we identified that kind of where we think we learned something. And I would say that in the second group of schools that we worked with, we used a request for proposal process where we opened up an application process to pretty much every school in the city. We tried to advertise it as best we could to both the district schools and charter schools. And we got, I think, if I remember correctly, about 12 applications from which we awarded very small planning grants to 7 schools. I think it was 2 district schools and 5 charter schools. And this was last spring. And last spring, I planned and helped those site-based teams learn about NextGen, learn about blended, organize some school tours, oriented them to the amazing videos and literature that's available on the web around all this stuff, and help them think through what would their school look like, what plan did they want to design, and then we asked them to pitch that back to us I think it was April. And we ultimately chose 4 schools out of those 7 to fund, and those 4 schools launched just a couple weeks ago at the start of school. 2 more in the district and 2 local charter schools. So we now have 6 in the district and 2 charters. So one of the main things, though, that I really enjoyed and I think has gotten us well from that RFP was that we had teachers and principals standing up pretty clear in what they wanted to do with the dollars and the support, because they went through this process and they had to pitch the plans themselves that they themselves had designed. And I think that there was that kind of has a lot of built-in buy-in that I think has served us really well in sustaining the work at those new schools and helping people dig into the details. And a blended implementation requires a lot of people understanding the nitty-gritty details about what's going on. One other, real quickly, a couple key policies was that I really am a fan of people identifying what they already have. Schools are not blank slates, and while existing things can sometimes get in the way, oftentimes that bank of computers can be resuscitated. That subscription to that online provider that you didn't get good usage out of could finally be taken advantage of without spending additional dollars. I find that particularly in the district, there are oftentimes resources that you already have that can be better used. And then lastly, when I say everything, really, I'm being a little bit aspirational in that I think that ultimately a next-gen school or a blended school could touch on pretty much every policy you could think of, from when and how we serve kids lunch to how we evaluate teachers and principals, credentialing, class size, you name it. And I actually think all ultimately and hopefully for the better for teachers and for students, moving us in a continued direction of more sustainability for teachers in their job, more joy in their role, and improving results for kids. I think we can do lots with these improvements. In terms of implementation strategies, we've learned a very few simple things, which is go big on network, number 1, and go big on network, number 2, that if you want to do any of this stuff, you need a dramatically amazing network that would rival what I imagine I experience if I'm in Tokyo or Singapore or Hong Kong or someplace where they say you never lose service. In terms of device ratios, we've learned with our teachers that a minimum of 1 to 3 is an implementation strategy that we needed. That if we had 1 to 3, 1 to 2, or 1 to 1, we saw teachers dig in and start having some fun and try different things with kids, and that fewer devices than 1 to 3 was too few for teachers to really organize rotations or groups, and it just became too complex. And then lastly, we found a lot of success by using web-based tools, just in their simplicity to deploy and scale, and that usually goes with using Google productivity tools, and DC there is digital citizenship. We did a much bigger emphasis on using web-based digital citizenship. Lastly, around lessons learned around teacher support systems, we learned that if teachers understand what what they're doing and why they're doing around blended, they can do a lot of their own support, and they'll want to learn how to do their own support. This year, we deployed about 1,000 Chromebooks in about 8 schools, and I set up maybe 5 to 10% of them myself, and I had some help doing another 5 or 10%, but the vast majority were set up by teachers we had trained to set them up themselves, and then they also trained kids to help them set them up. And I think we showed that it can be done, that teachers can do this. We gave them time to do it. We gave them the training and support to do it, and we gave them a tool that's relatively easy to set up. So I think that was a big lesson learned. So what does it look like? Like I said, it's all really site designed, so it varies from site to site. Most of our classrooms are now 1-to-2 or 1-to-1 in class. We generally have not messed with bell schedules or anything like that. There have been a few schools that have maybe transitioned from regular secondary periods to block scheduling, but nothing as dramatic as we've seen in other schools, particularly charter schools. Kids, when we think about blended learning, generally it means that during that period, that regular class period, kids are getting access to that personalized adaptive online content and all the benefits that come with that, such as immediate feedback and control over pace and place and path, and options on how they are assessed and that sort of stuff. And then at the same time, teachers are working with a personalized smaller group, and that kids are kind of switching or rotating through those two sides of the blend, based on sometimes on their own decision making, sometimes on the teacher's decision making, and sometimes a mix of both. And then I'll just add to that to make this happen, we did do a lot of tech support. So one thing we learned from year 1 to year 2 is we've basically gone with one single device in year 2. As I said, we're going with the Samsung Chromebook, and I'm not holding back any of the tech support secrets when it comes to that. I'm trying to share tech support ideas with as many stakeholders as I can when it comes to the details. So training teachers on how to enroll and wipe Chromebooks, encouraging them to train students, training my blended learning support specialists, training IT professionals in the central office, just really spreading out the how-to when it comes to support, so there are as few bottlenecks as possible, and also responding to teachers' needs quickly. I have teachers text me and email me and call me from all over OUSD and the charter schools, so that we can get them support as quickly as possible, or at least acknowledge that there's an issue going on and say, we'll get back to you, and try and respond within 24 hours or 48 hours at the very latest. I find that in the fall of a launch, that kind of really quick customer service for teachers is very critical to helping them feel comfortable and supported in trying new things and taking a risk of saying, okay, kids, we're all going to get onto Manga High now, and let's see how it goes, and for the very first time, because it can be very scary and uncomfortable for teachers, particularly if something doesn't work right. And generally speaking, when you're dealing with younger kids and lots of technology, that user error alone is going to mean you're going to have tech issues, even if the technology, the wireless network, and the devices are all set up perfectly. So I'm gonna end with just a couple quick points on where we're going now and in the future, which is, as many folks know, we have a move to the Common Core and online test. Oakland, and being in California, is a member of Smarter Balance Consortium. And so we've just recently had confirmed for us that we will not be taking the regular CST test this spring, that our schools will be told whether or not they're giving the reading or mathematics online assessment this spring instead, as part of, I think they're calling it the field test, although maybe it's called the practice test. I can never remember which is which. And so we are trying to take our technological lessons and scale them to other Oakland schools as quickly as we can, as we gear up for just the delivery of that assessment. Rogers Foundation is also really interested in piggybacking on that deployment of technology here in Oakland to say to principals and teachers, hey, you don't have to keep those carts of devices locked up in a closet until test time. You know, experiment with them, try them as it relates to both just regular teaching and learning. And of course, that means that things are going to break, things are going to go wrong, and we want to help lower the burden in terms of filling in where things do go wrong and helping make sure that come testing time, the sites have back what they need to make sure we can administer the test as kind of a low bar threshold for technological readiness. And then lastly, there are amazing opportunities out there as we think about launching additional schools here in Oakland. Rogers Foundation wants to continue to find ways to support additional schools. The Next Generation Learning Challenges are launching cohorts of schools to go blended and next gen all over the country, and we're working to support Oakland schools to have as many Oakland schools to apply to that as possible. And so there are lots of work working in parallel to help as many schools do this work as we can. Besides our formal 8 schools, I have found myself in relationship with about 10 other Oakland schools, both district and charter, who are all kind of self-launching and doing their darndest to learn about blended and next gen and which equipment to buy, and spending their own site-based dollars to piece it together. You know, buying their own content, creating their own accounts, training their teachers, and it's really admirable. And it's going to only get bigger and bigger as more and more teachers and principals realize how many easy wins there are when you can get the tech right to give tools all these fabulous next gen tools in their toolkit. So I guess I'm going to leave it there, and I'm happy to circle back with
Greg, if you could, before we start with Samantha, could you talk a little bit about which of the schools you worked with that were traditional schools that had to transform versus brand new schools, and then maybe I missed it, the grade levels of these schools that you've worked with are?
Definitely. So far, all of the schools that in our 8, we had 4 schools in year 1 who are now in year 2, and then 4 more schools just starting this school year. All of them were existing schools. And for the most part, all of them had very little technology to begin with. So they're all more transformational and existing schools. We have K-5 schools, 6-8 middle schools. We have a K-8, and one school actually has absorbed an elementary school and grown a 9th grade. So it's gone from a middle school to a TK-9. And we've been able to push our blended support actually into the TK-5 grade range, the middle school range, and the emerging 9th graders. We were able to support the 9th graders to go 1-to-1. So we kind of have a toehold in lots of different grade configurations.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that part, and then we'll turn it over to Samantha, and we can hear a little bit about the New York City schools and her experiences there.
Sure. So there's going to be sort of 2 parts to this. First, I'll talk a little bit about the research that I did last year around kind of what we saw as successful characteristics in both a blended learning classroom and a blended learning teacher, and then move into how we've tried to implement those here at Bronx Arena, and to hopefully get school-wide success in using this. So last year, or 2 years ago, I guess, I spent a year studying a teacher who was in a fully blended classroom. It was a middle school and in the Bronx. And one of the things, we picked up a lot of themes through this research, but the biggest theme that came through was there was a mental model sort of shift in this teacher from a teacher-centered idea of instruction to a student-centered idea of instruction. This then filtered down into every aspect of teaching and planning, and then there was a very interdiscipline or interdependence between all the levels of planning and communication that occurred. But everything stemmed from this shift from I need to be the one to disseminate information to kids to the kids are the ones sort of driving this car and in charge of their education. The teachers in the blended classroom saw technology as a tool to reinvent their craft and their learning experience, and the technology made blended learning sustainable. However, it was not the end-all be-all. So while they had computers in a 1-to-1 ratio and a 1-to-2 ratio, they also did a lot of things that did not involve the computer, and anything that they were doing could be done with a computer or it could be done without, and it was more about sort of the instruction and the curriculum that was behind all that. Again, the technology, I think, as Greg highlighted, definitely makes this more engaging and more sustainable, but blended learning is not necessarily about whether or not you're giving a kid a computer. The other thing we noticed was the use of data to drive instruction. So it was really, really necessary in order to individualize the practice that was going on with each of the kids. And one of the best parts about blended learning is the ability to individualize and personalize. The only way that that becomes effective is with the use of data constantly. So this teacher was tracking kids' progress through coursework. They were getting formative assessments throughout a period, and then they were able to give targeted feedback to kids around what they were seeing in the assessments. So just this constant cycle of data and then tracking that data. Several school policies that help make this transition. I think, as Greg highlighted, just the use of funds in a really strategic way to get the laptops to the students, and then also the general support from the administration for innovation. So there was a level of freedom that the teacher enjoyed in trying something new, and they didn't feel pressure from their administration to follow, a scripted curriculum. They didn't feel pressure to sort of do something by the book, so to speak. They were able to really branch out of their comfort zone. And then in terms of the implementation strategies, the teacher enjoyed a lot of support. They had support from iLearn NYC, who had sort of an implementation manager who came in and would meet with the teacher and debrief with the teacher. They also had a mentor in the school who was experienced with blended learning and was able to meet with them constantly around planning and support them along the way on just sort of reflecting on how it was going. And again, those teacher support systems also, came at a really technical level. There was an on-site tech who could provide support around some of the computer troubleshooting. There was technical support from iLearn on the software troubleshooting. So there was a lot of support systems in place. The teacher then also provided a lot of support back to the students. So we were talking 6th and 7th grade low-income students. Many of them read, on average, it was a 4th grade reading level. So there needed to be a lot of scaffolds in place for the students, and the teacher constantly planning on that and providing those supports was critical to the student experience, I think. Because part of what made the whole thing successful was the student buy-in and the student autonomy. And without that, you really don't get a classroom functioning as well as the one that we looked at. In terms of Bronx Arena, then, where are we at now? We're in our 3rd year, and this is the 2nd year using that Arena model. So somebody asked a question around, is it difficult to individualize instruction in large classes? And it absolutely is. So whether or not you have all the technology in the world, individualizing to a high ratio of students is going to be difficult. So at Bronx Arena, one of the things we did was to reduce that ratio as much as we could to a 25-to-1 ratio, which is to say we have one teacher responsible for 25 kids and the skill development of 25 kids. We just have seen a lot more success with being able to track and monitor that, and it's over a 4-hour block period, so you have more time with them as well. So developing their skills over a really concentrated period of time, we've seen a lot of success with that. And we also are using completely homemade curriculum for our blended classrooms. So we do not have Apex or Aventa or Ed 2020 or any of those sort of prepackaged curriculum. We develop all of our curriculum in-house using a collaborative curriculum design team. This is really, I think, where a shift came for us, was it allowed for students to be more engaged in the curriculum. It's project-based, so there's high-level skills and thinking that are aligned to Common Core and the college-ready skills that are expected of the kids. So I think the homemade curriculum is a big push for us. We're also beginning to really incorporate mastery-based and competency-based learning in order to individualize for students. We've introduced a senior portfolio that we feel really maximizes all of the advantages of blended learning in terms of students being able to pick a particular subject area or a particular topic that they're passionate about or that they're interested in and just kind of run with that. It's an individualized and customized research project for our seniors. And then we also worked on developing an online customized data tracking system that we felt was useful for our self-paced and or asynchronous, I should say, and mastery-based style and curriculum. In terms of where we're going, we want to move towards full competency-based instruction that will drive course selection. So in New York, like as in many states, there's, high school requirements come down to by subject area. And so many of our students, when they come in, they have gaps in their transcripts because of we get them from high schools all over the place. And they come in often taking courses simply based on what holes they have in their transcript. But what we want to start shifting the thinking to is what holes and gaps do they have in their skills, and then how can we select coursework that's going to best support them in that skill development. So while they might need an English class, we can actually, if we're using competency-based learning and aligning our curriculum to those competencies, we can have a student select an English class based on what skill they're trying to work on. So if they need argument skills, we have courses targeted to developing that. If they need fluency skills because they come in at a low reading level, we can help select courses that target that. We also want to work on having students build their own curriculum based on their interests and aligned to their competencies. So we're playing around with this sort of design your own project in some of our courses where students actually kind of stay true to the theme of the course, but then design their own actual product that they want to do to incorporate that theme and demonstrate those skills. So they can start to kind of use some of their creativity, and then again it speaks to that take ownership of their own education aspect. We also want to continue to develop the data tracker, so we're working with a computer design company based out of New Jersey to help basically in a phase 2 and a phase 3 of this data tracker that we'll use to track individualized pathways using the competencies. So as of this point, the tracker really kind of it tracks a student's progress through a course, and it also tracks their daily goals in completing tasks and outputs. But we really want to maximize it to truly help track the individualized pathways that are being created for a kid. And then finally, I think we want to create more dynamic curriculum through partnerships with other schools. So we create a lot of our curriculum in a collaborative nature, but it's all here at Bronx Arena. And I think one of the great things about blended learning is the ability to branch out and reach out to people that you may or may not typically be able to access. And I think we want to continue to do that on a curriculum level to get a really dynamic.
Sam, before we go into your model, could I ask you to talk a little bit about the students you have at Bronx Arena and how long Bronx Arena has been around and how the teachers were developed and that sort of thing, so that people have a context of the types of students that you serve and the teachers that are serving those students?
Sure, absolutely. So Bronx Arena, like I said, we were in our third year. We opened as a fully blended school, so we were not transformed from a traditional school to a blended school. So we did have a real big advantage there. Our students are typically ages 16 to 21, and they are students who have attempted high school in a traditional four-year setting, for a huge variety of reasons have gotten off of that graduation pathway and have disengaged from school. So it's our job to basically take them in, re-engage them in school, and then get them to graduation before they age out. And then we also then push them on to college. So every student graduates from Bronx Arena with a post-secondary plan. And of our graduates over the past 2 years, all of them have had that post-secondary plan be either four-year college or two-year college, depending on their circumstances. In terms of our teachers, we have a variety of teachers in terms of their tech experience, tech comfort level, whatever you want to call it. We're upfront about the school when we hire. However, we also provide them with a lot of tech support. We have a full-time tech who actually works with teachers in terms of getting them comfortable with using the data tracker, with navigating the website, with using an iPad. We provide all of our teachers with a computer and an iPad so that they can take them home, they can get comfortable with them, with the technology even outside of their teaching periods. We also do professional development for our teachers 2 days a week in the mornings for an hour, where we not only get at, I think, the blended learning kind of tricks, so to speak, but also just good, sound teaching practices that really feed into all of this. So we work on developing curriculum, developing facilitation plans, so you can help work with a kid, how to develop strong assessments, questioning skills, those types of things. In terms of our specific model, like I said, we have homemade project-based curriculum that we use something called the legacy model. It's a 3-project cycle. All of our curriculum is created collaboratively in what we call CDTs, or curriculum design teams. So about every semester we'll create around 10 courses, and these are semester-long courses, and they vary in subject area. We believe that blended learning is really not about any of the technology. It's more about blending the knowledge with intrinsic learning habits of a student. So you can do this with or without a computer. Like I said, we view that as something that is helpful and can be add a whole new dynamic, but is not actually necessary. We utilize the Arena model with the generalist teacher working with the 25 students, and then content specialist co-teachers, which is to say that if the generalist is not an expert in math, they'll have a math teacher push in with them and co-teach with them to add a level of expertise and rigor to the math curriculum. We also use competency-based learning to individualize and personalize. So we developed a set of Bronx Arena competencies, and these are about 40 interdisciplinary skills that we took the Common Core and basically broke it down into these 40 interdisciplinary skills. So each skill is aligned to several Common Core standards. But what we noticed in reading the Common Core was that they were saying sort of that the same skill, and it was in math, and then it was in history and science and technology, and then it was in writing, and then it was in reading, but it was all comparing and contrasting. It just looked a little bit different. So we basically just pared that down so that it became more digestible to both students and staff. And then we utilize a customized data tracker to monitor student progress, help have students set their own goals every day, and then also track competency mastery. I think with that, we're going to open it up, I think, to other discussion. I don't know. Greg, you could take over. Or Rob, maybe you want to take over at this point.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both, Greg and Sam, for giving the background. I think I'd like to jump to one of the questions that was asked in the chat room, and maybe you can both address this question versus the questions that we came up with. One of the questions that Sahar asked is, isn't it difficult to individualize instruction in large classes? So perhaps both of you could think about a classroom and how they individualize the instruction and how that works.
Sure. I would say that yes, individualizing instruction in large classes is difficult. I think it's difficult in small classes. It's just difficult, plain and simple. I think that if you're going to have a large class, that I would much rather have lots of technology in that classroom to help me individualize instruction. That would make it easier for me to do it, because you can have kids work on different sites or different tools on different skills, different concepts, generally all at their own level, and the computer can give that kid feedback. You know, did they get it right? Did they get it wrong? Do they need a hint? Do I need to automatically flag the student for the teacher and send the teacher a message that they might need more help? So I guess that would be my response.
Yeah, I would concur, I think, with everything that Greg said. We saw in the middle school blended learning with 32 students and 1 teacher, and now at Bronx Arena we have 25 to 1. I think that it's difficult on any level. You could have 5 kids, and I think it would still be hard. But that being said, the technology can definitely help manage even with, say, 32 kids. As long as I think it all goes back to sort of good, solid teaching practices, which are really about planning and then using some type of data to then plan your next move. It's that cycle sort of plan, implement, assess, plan, and whether that's done at sort of with 32 kids, 25 kids, 15 kids, it's critical because you're not going to be able to utilize any of the, I think, great aspects of technology without having sort of the nuts and bolts of good teaching solidified for you.
Could each of you talk a little bit about what the teacher does to individualize instruction? I mean, what sort of data are they receiving on a weekly basis that causes them to be able to individualize instruction in an ongoing way? Maybe you could identify one teacher you think of and maybe describe how they do it so that others can get a picture of what that might look like.
Sam, you go first.
Oh. Okay, yeah, I have, so one of my teachers who I would say is probably one of our best at this, she's an ELA teacher, her expertise is in ELA. She has her class of 25 over 4 hours, and she's helping them through not only ELA, but all of their subject areas. And what she does essentially is, every week, she develops a weekly plan for where she'll think about sort of the small group instruction that she wants to do that week with students, and that can be with in ELA. It can also be part of around these like cross-discipline skills. So she might design a lesson for a group of 8 kids around how do you use a Venn diagram to compare and contrast, or how do you outline an argument essay. So whether you're in social studies or science or ELA, you need to do some argument. And then she'll figure out sort of those small group mini lessons for her week, and then she'll list her 25 kids and have an objective listed for each one of those kids that by the end of the week she wants to make sure that they master. And these are customized around the needs of those kids based on what course they're working on and where they're at in that course at that time, and then how they're kind of progressing through that and the level of work she's getting at. And then she'll kind of work through each of those individual objectives with the students, either in one-on-one conferences with them or one-on-one targeted lessons. She might pair kids together who one has a strength in one area, one has a strength in another area. And then she outlines the assessment or the check for understanding that she's going to use with those kids for that objective. And then after that's done, she'll make notes, and this is all in a facilitation plan. So she has a really tight, solid Google Doc that she's filling out weekly and that she's constantly updating throughout the week, like a running record. And then in terms of differentiating or individualizing the actual curriculum, she looks at the online curriculum, and then based off the students' needs and the objectives that she's designed for them, she might substitute tasks that are in that curriculum for the kid. She might give them a different resource to help that supplements sort of the resources already there. If she knows that a kid, for example, is a low-level reader and needs an audio recording of a book, she'll supplement that at that point. If a kid is struggling with a particular task, she might do that task with them so that they can get even additional support. And so she's constantly sort of mixing and matching what a kid needs from a curricular aspect. Just really utilizing like a universal design for learning, or like a UDL model, in the way she customizes and differentiates the actual curriculum for a kid. And I just see a question here around groupings. So we don't have grade level at Bronx Arena, so the kids are just placed basically with a teacher, and they're basically of the 16 to 21 age group, and they're all sort of like mixed together. So in terms of groupings, we have completely heterogeneous groupings across those classes.
Rob, you want me to weigh in real quick?
Yes, Greg, please.
Okay, so I'll do two quick examples around how teachers personalize in Oakland or individualize. And I saw Susan comment that we do need better language to describe all of this. Even this idea of individualize, it doesn't, in my head, it doesn't necessarily mean that the kid is getting something solo or working, on their own completely. That when that teacher is working with a personalized small group, might be simultaneous instruction to a small group of kids, but it is, those kids are there for a personal reason that might be in common amongst them. And so, for example, at one of our schools, they have a lab rotation model where two, say, fourth grade teachers each get to send half their students to a lab with a lab teacher, where the kids have access to adaptive online content out of the room, not with their core teacher. Left back in each of those two fourth grade rooms then is half of the class of each of those for each of those teachers, and the teachers then run small group rotations with only half of the class. So each of those, say, 3 groups that are rotating in that teacher's room might only have 3 to 5 kids in each of those groups. One of those groups is with teacher. And this school was really, they had churn with teachers, they had a lot of new teachers. They are actually leveraging this kind of blended model to as with the direct hope of supporting new teachers to learn their craft of building relationships with kids, getting to know kids well, getting to know their families, getting to know their learning styles, things that teachers have been doing for generations, but just supporting new teachers to kind of do that in smaller chunks with all sorts of traditional methods. And then teachers then over time can influence which half of their class is sent out to the lab at what point and for what reasons, and to go work on which concepts over there on the computers. And at the same time, they can have as much choice as they want in then which kids stay with them. And then even within that, how those kids are then grouped so that they come to the teacher. So there's high degrees of personalization opportunities that the teachers will build, and as they get more familiar and comfortable with the routines, and I also think as the data reports start to flow back from the adaptive online content that's happening in the lab, the teacher will have access to that data also, which they can then use to form their groups or to form the tiny groups or however they want, or to redirect kids to work on different things when they're in the lab. And then one other quick story is, I've got a middle school math teacher. She'll do an entrance ticket to the classroom using devices, get a bunch of quick data on which kids kind of know that concept already, say the concept of the day or the lesson that she's about to go. And based on both their accuracy and their confidence level, she will allow kids sometimes to self-select out of the lesson, which would mean letting them go back to their adaptive online content where they might be reviewing older concepts, practicing something from another day, soaring ahead and accelerating. That again is personalized for kids. Well, she retains some number of kids who either got it wrong or are reporting that they kind of get it but don't have a high degree of confidence, can do the lesson with those kids, check them again, and then release again a new round of kids to go work on adaptive online content, either to practice that skill, practice something else. Again, she can make all those decisions on the fly based on the data she's getting from kids in the lesson right then.
The other question that was asked earlier by Brenda is, what were the school policies, or were the school policies at a high conceptual level or more practical in nature? And that was also one of the topics that we talked about answering. So, Greg, maybe I can have you follow up first, and then Samantha about, think about, are there district policies in place, school policies, classroom policies, procedures, and how are those decided, and what are some of those policies that facilitate blended learning? Greg, and then Samantha.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Ed Code is involved, there's federal law and this sort of stuff when you're talking about, giving kids accounts or sharing data. So there are ways to be in compliance around that. Those policies were put in place probably long before people started throwing around the term blended learning, but I know that, we need parents to consent to acceptable use policies, and we notify and have parents accept that if we're giving kids a Google account, that kind of thing. Schools, schools will say, what are we going to do to maintain all this new hardware? And I generally say, well, what do you do now to maintain your hardware? And oftentimes schools dig up policies that they can dust off and tweak to deal with those sorts of things. But I definitely help schools set up, help desk ticket systems if they need it, or how to access a central office system that they maybe didn't have full working knowledge of. I tell teachers, yes, it might not be in your standards for your subject, but you should spend time letting your kids, or teaching your kids about digital citizenship and responsible use, because if you don't do it in the beginning and come back to it periodically through the year, you will do it anyway with the time you waste because kids are being kids on the web and stuff will happen. And so I think, it's just, there needs to be good policy around the general instruction we give our young people around just being good netizens, as they say. There are policies around that have come up more in the charter world, line of sight issues that need to get worked out around credentialing teachers versus non-credentialed employees. There are, there are, as I said, this can touch on a whole host of things. I think there's a lot of it you can get pretty far under the existing policy regime, but we will start running into barriers, and we will likely need new legislation that kind of open up new flexibilities. One other big piece of policy that already is being opened up is around funding, so like E-rate funding and E-rate modernization to kind of both increase the funding availability for schools and also decreasing the bureaucracy it takes to access that funding.
So I think Greg spoke a lot at the district level on policies, and we found sort of all the same things on that. And New York in particular, we had to get a waiver in order to have asynchronous learning happening our first year. That waiver is now actually state law, so that if you are using blended learning, there's a seat time waiver, so the students don't have to necessarily actually sit through the course for a certain number of hours if they're utilizing blended learning. So that was a huge sort of district-wide had a district-wide impact. In terms of our school, we have a number of policies and procedures that both are, I think, philosophical and then also really practical. So we have a school, one of our biggest, I think, practical ones was we implemented a school-wide minimum work requirement policy, which is to say that in an asynchronous, particularly environment, students were tending to come to school, but it would take them, a whole day to get through one assignment, which was impeding sort of their progress. So we implemented a school-wide minimum work requirement of you have to complete 3 assignments a day at the minimum. And then there's consequences for not meeting that, but then there's also rewards in place for meeting that and exceeding that. And so we've seen a huge jump in productivity of the students. We've seen teachers even giving feedback on a more regular basis as a result of that. We've seen credit accumulation increase as a result of that. Students are progressing through courses faster. So I think something like a minimum work requirement for those of you who might be looking to implement a more asynchronous situation would be a huge kind of push. I'd push hard for that. Other things we have at the school level, we have consistency, like I said, in the curriculum, which really helps with that. The CDTs are made up of our teachers, and they meet during the teachers' professional development periods as well as after school. We do have a policy for providing teachers with templates that they use in order to create all the curriculum so that they're constantly thinking about student-facing curriculum. We provide our teachers in general with templates for helping them plan in this environment. So we know that your lesson plan is going to look a lot different than like a traditional workshop model lesson plan. So we've worked to create templates that help them and guide them in their planning processes. We have a school-wide data tracking system that we've chosen to invest our funds in developing. So there's been a lot of school policies and procedures put in place. Within the classroom, though, there's a lot of things that we've seen our teachers do that have been really successful. They do a lot of public goal setting for the kids. So kids either developing a monthly goal, they develop a daily goal, they develop a yearly goal, they develop action plans constantly in a self-paced nature or in a more autonomous nature. It was really critical that the students learn how to task manage and how to action plan. We have the classrooms themselves are physically kind of arranged to help promote the various facilitate what we call facilitation styles or facilitation modes, which is to say, Greg spoke earlier about teachers having small groups and doing one-to-ones and have maybe dividing a classroom in half. And we have these facilitation modes around you're doing a small group mini lesson, or you're doing a discussion, or you're matching kids up in a peer-to-peer interaction, or you're doing a one-on-one or a conference. And if you go into the classroom, a lot of our teachers arrange their classrooms to help really facilitate the different those different teaching styles and those different teaching models. So they might have an area of the classroom that's dedicated just to where the small group meets, so that you know that if you're in the small group, you're going to meet there. If you're doing a conference, they have a small table off to the side that they can pull kids to do a conference with. When they do a one-on-one, they actually approach the student and pull the chair up to the student so that the student knows that they're getting that one-on-one attention. We have so there's, and then, you know, each teacher also has their own sort of unique systems in place that utilize we also utilize Google Docs across the school so that there's consistency in that as well. And some teachers have really utilized like Google Forms to help students reach out for help. So if they're struggling with like a problem or a particular task, they can use a Google form to help let not only their generalist teacher know, but any other teacher who that might be co-teaching that they need to make aware of with some of these things. So there's just a lot of policies at all three of these levels, I think, and they range from a philosophical down to a really practical.
So for a couple final thoughts from you, Samantha first, and then Greg, you'll have the last word. So maybe you guys could talk a little bit about, so is there any going back, or what does the future hold as far as your experiences with blended learning and how things will be transformed or not transformed? So Samantha, your 1 minute final thought on that, and then Greg, and then that will conclude our webinar for today.
Sure. I just think going forward, we do need to, as a community, I think, come together and really start getting some common language around these things. We need to be sharing best practices as much as we can. I think that really the sky's the limit with this style and this approach. That being said, I think we need to be really cautious as to how we're utilizing that so that it doesn't turn into sort of becoming that feared, what we call plug and play, where there's 25 kids just mindlessly sitting on a laptop going through some prepackaged curriculum and a teacher sitting at a desk up at the front reading the newspaper or only giving feedback via chat rooms or digital commentary. I just want to make sure that we continue with blended learning to, the point of it, I think, is to increase the human-to-human interactions and not see a computer as replacing a teacher. And I just, as we move forward, I think that needs to continue to be at the forefront of all this, is that the goal here is around building relationships and strengthening relationships in order to promote student learning. And that would be my only word of caution, I guess, on that.
Yeah, and I'll say, there's continues to be plenty of media coverage about what's going on, particularly around like big rollouts of infrastructure. So I know lots of folks have followed what's going on in LA with their iPads or with the Amplify charger that melted down and all this sort of stuff. And I guess I just want to say that, schools and school systems are gonna move forward with deployments, blended, tech-enabled, tech-rich, all sorts of things. I think, and there will be mistakes and there will be successes. And I think, as with anything, we're going to just have to it's a commitment to constant learning and to keep getting better and better. And I found that when we listen to particularly teachers and also principals about what problems they're trying to solve, that we get further faster when the solutions are really grounded in the daily work, but that that those teachers and principals have access to poke their heads up out of the sand and be able to say, oh, well, what is going on across the country, so that the solution pot is rich. And I think when we do that, you find that it becomes sustainable, that the policies start to align, that it becomes financially, doable increasingly, and that it's, different things are going to work for different systems. So, I'm excited about all of this stuff happening. I think it makes sense why it's all happening now. And I'm very hopeful for the future as we basically are dramatically increasing the tools at teachers' disposal and at kids' disposal to dramatically increase our achievement and make schools do the things we want them and need them to do, and forget having schools do the things we no longer need them to do.
Please join me in doing your pull down happy face or applause and thanking both Greg and Samantha for sharing all their insights about blended learning. I couldn't thank you both enough for all the preparation that you did in making this leadership webinar so successful. So hopefully I'll see many of you on our next webinars, which are coming up next week, and you can check out our website for those and sign up for those that also deal with blended learning in a different angle at www.inacall.org. Thanks everybody for being here, and as I mentioned earlier, an email with the recording link will be sent out to you, so you're welcome to share that with other people. And then keep learning and keep teaching and keep making a difference in education. Thanks everybody.